everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, I'm going to be getting back into some more Bigfoot stories. I'm going to be talking about Bigfoot in the Yukon Territory of Canada. I haven't really touched Canada yet. We've done some Pacific Northwest. I've done a lot of East Coast, some down south, but haven't really touched on Canada. And wanted to talk about the Yukon. Actually, Rebecca's aunt and uncle just visited the Yukon a few months ago. I think it was over the summer they were there. And they RV. They have an RV and they travel across the country. And Dan and Sandy, very cool. They have this RV and they just go all over the place. And it's kind of, like one of my dreams one day is just to just get in an RV and see the country and go to these places like Alaska and the Yukon. But I have 3 stories this week from the Yukon, very cool stories. And Scott and I on the show, and I've mentioned this on the show before, we've discussed the different types of Bigfoot. And up there, you see a very different type of Sasquatch. You see much taller, bigger creatures. Whereas, here in the lower 48, you hear a lot of 8-foot tall, 9-foot tall. Up in Alaska, up in, the Yukon, sometimes you hear 10 feet tall, 15 feet tall, 20 feet tall. I mean, some of it gets like almost unbelievable. I mean, not, Bigfoot's already a bit of an unbelievable thing to begin with, but then you start talking about these really tall creatures, it gets a little freaky. But some cool encounters here I'm going to get to this week. I also want to talk real quick before we get into that. I want to discuss a story that dropped about 2 weeks ago about 2 hunters in Portland, Oregon, who died as a result of looking for Bigfoot. And I want to talk about that story and just what happened to them. And it's very sad and it's a cautionary tale, but we'll get into that. And then we'll talk about some Yukon Bigfoot sightings. Okay, so this is from the BBC. 2 men found dead while searching for Bigfoot. And this, like I said, is from 2 weeks ago, December 30th. So I'll read the article here. 2 men were found dead in a remote forest while searching for Sasquatch, also commonly known as Bigfoot, according to authorities in Washington state. The 2 men from Portland, Oregon, were found dead after a 3-day search was launched on Christmas Day. Very sad that, Christmas, this has to happen. After a family member reported that the pair had not returned from a trip to the Gifford Pinchot National Forest to search for proof of the mythical, hairy, forest-dwelling bipedal primates. The search involved over 60 volunteers searching with aircraft and dog in heavily wooded terrain and brutally cold weather conditions, the Skamania County Sheriff's Office said in its news release. Both deaths appear to be due to exposure based on weather conditions and ill preparedness, the statement said. The sheriff's office found a car belonging to the victims near the town of Willard, the statement said, and the search refocused to that area. Drones were also used, and a Coast Guard helicopter team was called in to help with the search. Officials have not provided the names of the 2 victims, aged 37 and 59. So very sad. Both these guys way too young to pass. Weather conditions in the Cascade Mountains had been frigid in the days before and during the search, which included snow, freezing rain, and temperatures falling below freezing. Rescuers also had to battle high water levels in the rivers and fallen trees. Hundreds of sightings of Sasquatch have been reported in the Pacific Northwest of the United States and Western Canada. And we're going to talk about Western Canada tonight, the Yukon. Alongside the Loch Ness Monster, the creature is one of the world's most famous cryptids, animals whose existence is disputed or unsubstantiated by science. There have been so many alleged sightings of Sasquatch that some communities have taken measures to protect the hairy, mythical creature. In Skamania County, where the pair went missing, a person could get a year in jail or a $1,000 fine if one of the folklore creatures is harmed. So to talk about this a little bit, and I don't want to shame these guys at all, but just as sort of a PSA for everyone out there, nature will kill you. Nature does not discriminate. Nature does not care. And it's just sad that these guys had to meet this end due to weather and ill preparedness. And when you go into the woods, it is so, so important to be prepared and to take steps to look ahead. So you always want to check the weather. If there's going to be bad weather, snow, freezing rain, anything like that, don't go. If you're not feeling well, and I just did a video, a bonus video on YouTube, dropped on this past Tuesday, Bigfoot and the solar eclipse, and I talk in it about Josh and I had planned this camping trip to Chase Lake. We were going to do 2 nights at the lean-to. Neither one of us were really feeling good. And we decided to scrap the trip because being sick in the bush, being sick out in the wilderness, when you're 3, 4, 5, 6 miles from your car, it is not like being sick at home, you know. And there's this sort of notion of, be a man and get out there and, it's just a little cold. It's just this, it's just a little ache in your knee. Don't risk it. It's not worth your life. If you're already out there and something happens, you have to do what you need to do to survive. But if you are not feeling well, if there's bad weather coming, don't go out that weekend. Wait till the next weekend. Bigfoot will wait for you. Camping will wait for you. The outdoors will wait. Don't go. And it's just so many people don't realize that. And, the weather can change. You're going to these mountainous terrains, even in the Adirondacks. We go camping in the Adirondacks, and there's just this joke that if the weather says no rain, it's going to rain. If the weather says a little bit of rain, it's going to be a lot of rain. So we are always prepared. We bring ponchos, we bring tarps, we bring our tents. Even if we're hiking, we hiked to Farrow Lake. We did like 6 miles into this lean-to at Farrow Lake, and we took our tents with us because we just didn't know if the lean-to would be taken. And be prepared. It's just so key to be prepared. And, I think people don't realize how cold it gets in the woods. And even when you check the weather and you say, oh, in this area, it's, the overnight low is going to be 20 degrees. In the woods, easily take 10, 15, 20 degrees off that. It's going to get much colder. And if you're not prepared for that, if you don't have the right clothing, the right sleeping gear, you watch these movies and people, they'll be out in the cold and they're wearing like one jacket and they start this little tiny fire and they're warming their hands and that helps. And it, it doesn't. I mean, Josh and I have been out there sometimes with big roaring fires. And unless you're right up against that fire, you're freezing. You take a step back from that fire and the fire might not even as well be lit. So a very sad story here. These guys looking for Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and I appreciate their passion. And it's just sad to me that it doesn't say here exactly how they were ill prepared. Weather, like I said, can be a little crazy. You just never know. It can say it's going to be sunny and it can rain, it can snow. You just never know. So, but the key is to be prepared. You have to have extra food, extra water, extra layers. We always bring extra layers, no matter how warm we think it's going to be. We always prepare for like, but what if it gets cold? I got to put on a base layer. I should have an extra blanket. I have an extra hoodie, whatever it is, just to stay warm. So I feel for these guys. Very sad story. And it sounds like it's preventable. Again, not a lot of details here, but very sad. And again, I just want to do a little PSA and, link it back to that episode, the video that Josh and I put out on Tuesday about how we were sick and we just canceled our trip and we weren't even that sick. It was just a matter of, do we want to get up at 1 a.m. and realize like, hey, this has gotten worse. I need to get to a doctor. I need to get to a hospital. And now we're 3 miles in the woods in the middle of the night and it's dark and it's swampy and it's muddy and it's cold. And you throw all on top of that you don't feel good. You're going to have a bad time and it's dangerous. So it's just not worth going out if, you're not feeling good. And we've had to do that a few times over the years, just cancel a trip. And it's like, the Adirondacks will still be there. They'll be there next month. They'll be there, next spring, whatever we have to go, we'll go. But again, just be prepared, check the weather. And if there's any doubt in your mind about going out there, don't go out. It's just not worth risking your life. So there's my PSA. And let's move on to more fun and entertaining things now. But yeah, very sorry for these guys. Rest in peace, guys. Okay, story number 1 from the Yukon. Man recalls close encounter while on afternoon walk near Whitehorse. This is from 1992, summer, so August. There's some spelling and grammatical errors in this. It's a very long account, so I'm going to do my best here. But if I screw up a little bit, just be kind. Because like I said, there's some misspellings here. There's some grammatical errors. But I'm going to try to get through this. It's a longer tale, but it's pretty cool. So location details at the end of Thompson Boulevard in a suburban neighborhood, a fairly dense one too. However, the woods next to it, where I seen this thing, is also very dense. Lots of outcrops and old mines, a few swamps, and lots of trees. Nearest town is Whitehorse, and we're going to talk about Whitehorse again in a subsequent story. Nearest road is Thompson Boulevard, and he says this, observed. The incident happened in the summer of 1992 in my hometown of Whitehorse, Yukon, while I was taking a walk with my mother in the woods near her home. At the time, I guess, I was about 39 years old and her about 60. This is the first time I've told this story to the public. What prompted me to tell the story is that I see very few Sasquatch stories on the site from the Yukon. And this is true. There's 3 stories here. And Yukon is huge, and it's up there, where you think this would be Bigfoot territory. And there's only 3 submitted stories here. So interesting. So to continue, actually, from what I've seen and heard, the Yukon should be considered a hotspot for Sasquatch or Bushman, as it is known up here. I'm going to tell the story the way it comes out, and here it is. Being a sort of explorer kind of a person, I like to take walks in the woods and off the beaten track so I have a better chance of finding something rare or interesting. For one, I am a serious rock hound, and another, I am a major local history buff, so I'm always off in the woods looking for something. Anyway, one evening I decided to take a walk down this old road heading west into some pretty dense and very rocky forest. It was a cat road, and it was skinny, and tall trees were on each side, and the funny thing was, it kept on twisting and turning back and forth, so that at any given time, either forward or behind, the line of sight was only about maybe 80 feet, I figure. Anyway, I walk and sort of hope to get somewhere. A clearing, an old cabin, or at least a change of terrain, but no such luck. So I like this guy's adventurous spirit. He's just kind of out there like, what can I find? Maybe a cabin, maybe a cool, rock formation or, whatever. I noticed it was getting close to dark, so I figured I'd better turn around and head back, which was probably about an hour and a half walk. I got back to my mom's just as darkness fell. Just for the record, during the whole time, I did not get any weird or scared feelings or anticipate anything to happen. Nor did anything, which in retrospect has an interesting dimension. Point being, as it was extremely silent, almost too silent. Anyway, the next morning, I tell my mom about the road and the fact that not far down there was an old dump where we might find some old bottles. Did she want to go check it out? Sure, she says. It was a beautiful sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and it was about 20 degrees. A perfect day for a walk. So we go. We get to the dump, which was a very short distance down the road. She checks it out, but finds all the bottles broken. She's fine, though, and enjoying herself and picking flowers. I ask her if she wants to continue down the road a while. She says, okay, but are you sure there are no bears around? I say, I don't think so. I never heard or seen nothing last night. And besides, I've been in these woods all my life, and I never had any bear problems. I've seen a few, but they always took off, and they were all rather small black bears. So that's a good point right there. Like, this is someone who's not seeing a lot of bears. Most of the bears there are black bears. And as is often the case, most bears are going to run from you. A lot of people are afraid of bears, and bears can be dangerous, and they will, especially if they have cubs. For the most part, though, most animals don't want to bother with people. They're going to just run, whether it's a bear or anything else. So to continue. Anyway, we continue down the road, but just because Mom made me aware, I sort of walked in front of her 50 feet or so and looked around each corner of the bend in the road, sort of bird-dogging the scene. I guess at about the 4th or 5th bend, I do see something up on the rise to the left about 80 feet away, standing and moving slightly side to side. So to stop again, we hear this a lot in Bigfoot encounters where they sort of do this rocking motion. They just kind of rock back and forth. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what it's about, but I hear that again and again in Bigfoot stories where it just kind of rocks back and forth. It just sways. Weird. I stop in my tracks. My mom stops in hers about 50 feet back and out of view. I turn to her and say, someone is up ahead. I look again, and there he is. I expect him to approach and say hi or whatever. So again, when you're out there, most things you're worried about are other people. It's not the bears. It's not the coyotes. It's other people. So you see someone and you're going to kind of be like, okay, let's assess this situation. So he's expecting him to say hi or whatever. It doesn't happen. I look closer. The sun is behind him, and he is in the shade of the trees. The sun is never high up here. They're very far north. I noticed that this guy, besides being unusually big and tall, is also wearing black coveralls, and he has a huge mop of hair tapering from the top of his head to the outside of his shoulders. Now I'm standing in the middle of the road. My bright purple t-shirt is glowing almost neon bright in the sunshine. I'm waiting for him to approach, and I'm staring at him, trying to see the face, the eyes. Nothing. He's still swaying from side to side a bit, but otherwise just standing there. My mom is still about 50 feet back and she is staying there. She doesn't want to approach any further. She is saying, "What? What is it, Bill?" I say, "I'm not sure." It's now about 2 minutes into the scene, and I'm now starting to feel weird. I'm staring at him, and he is staring at me, but I can't see his face. He's in the bloody shadows of the trees. Finally, after I figure 3 minutes of this stare down, I start to face reality, but I don't want to. That's the only way I can explain my feelings. As soon as I realized what I was having to stare down with, I got pretty excited. The first thing that came to my mind was that I didn't want mom to see it, or it her. I wanted to diffuse the situation with no screaming, no jumping, no fainting, and no running. I was thinking of approaching, but something told me not to, and anyway, it started to approach me. In a split second, I turned on my heel and told mom, "Let's go." I still never told her what I saw and didn't have to. By looking at me, she knew. We walked at a quick pace, but I refused to run. I looked back at every corner, and about the third corner, there he was, about 20 feet behind, so it's following them out now. As soon as I saw him, he was gone. Gone in the woods, absolutely silently, not a sound. He was huge. 2 silent strides, and he was gone. This close encounter lasted, I figure, about 1 second at most, so fast that your mind doesn't even want to remember. But I did, and one thing for sure is I was relieved that he was gone and in another direction. After that, we finally came out to the main road. We went across and sat on a log in the woods on the other side. We took out a sandwich, and that's when I said, "Do you know what I saw?" She says, "No." I say, "Sasquatch. I saw Sasquatch." She says, "Are you sure?" I say, "Yes, ma'am. I remember," names omitted, "talking about it. Apparently, it visits the village all the time at night and rummages around in the yards. We went home and I drew a picture of it and went through it in my mind over and over again to keep the memory. That was 14 years ago, and I can still remember it very well." So, another thing we hear is that these creatures will sometimes come up to dumpsters or go through people's garbage. They're like looking for food. Just another thing that's weird. Doesn't, it's not unexplainable. I mean, if they're looking for food, but you hear this a lot that they're near dumpsters or trash cans. Also noticed, like I said, it was extremely quiet. I don't recall hearing birds or squirrels or nothing. When he walked, it seemed that he was levitated, like he wasn't touching the ground, but a few inches above. He also seemed to have no definition outside of the silhouette, just like a shadow. Don't know if he had hair or fur, as I didn't bother to go up and touch him. The really weird thing is his pointy head configuration, very pronounced. When I was watching him, I thought of Saturday Night Live's Coneheads, but I surely was not laughing. Also, at the time of the incident, my adrenaline was the highest as it has ever been in my life. I was looking for a stick or club, but couldn't find one, which angered me, and I was ready to take him on if need be, though I didn't figure I had much of a chance. So, yeah, he's talking about the conical head, cone shaped head like apes have. And he's just trying to think about defending himself. Like, let me grab a stick or something. He doesn't have a gun with him. So, but if this thing came at them, he'd have to at least try to defend himself and his mother. So really interesting. Other stories, like the natives, like I said, the natives see or hear him in their village, which is about 2 miles away. I figure I bumped into him on his way there. I've talked to a few natives, and our descriptions are uncannily similar. Now I believe in Bushman, and I think we should leave him and his kind at peace. So about 2 in the afternoon, sunny, 20 degrees, pine and spruce, aspen, willow, swamp, so swampy area. Follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Milan Kubik, who says, "I spoke with the reportee for some time and have no reason to believe that he was mistaken in the identity of what he saw or that he was fabricating the story. There are other sightings and stories of Sasquatches over the years in the reported area. I will follow up with a visit in the area in the summer of 2009. There's no follow-up here. But I like this guy's story mainly because of a few things. I mean, one, he lives up there. He's not a city slicker. He's familiar with bear, familiar with the wildlife around there. Two, when he first sees this thing, he's thinking it's another person, and he's worried about that because you run into another person in the woods, and your senses always kind of get pricked up, and you're like, okay, like, who is this? Do I have to worry about them? Is this just another friendly hiker, or is this some weirdo? So he's just thinking this is another guy. Uh, Another thing I like is that he's not embellishing details. He's just saying he sees this silhouette. The sun is kind of behind them, behind this Bigfoot, and he can just kind of see the outline that it's human shaped. It's got hair or fur. It's got a conical head, and when they and it's doing the swaying motion. That's just really interesting to me. And then it starts following them out, and then it just runs into the woods and is gone. And that's another thing we hear, that people will see these things and then it turns, it takes 2 steps into the woods and they can't track it anymore. It just like it disappears. So really weird, but I think a really good story. I don't think this guy saw a bear. I don't think it was a person. I think once he realized how big this thing was, uh, he realized that I'm not looking at a bear. I'm not looking at a person. What could this be? It's got to be Bigfoot. So a really interesting story. I like this story a lot. I don't know if his mother got as good a look. She was 50 feet behind him. She seems a little bit less certain, because he had to tell her, I saw Sasquatch. She was probably still thinking this was a person and maybe just a sketchy person they had to leave. But interesting, he goes home, he draws a picture of this, and he's rummaging over this in his mind, just running this over in his mind over and over again. Really interesting. So I like this story from the Yukon. Just he doesn't say how big it was. He's just saying bigger than a man. Black bear are not that big. Black bear, they stand up 5-6 feet tall. Sometimes they get a little bit bigger. Could it have been a grizzly? Sure, but a grizzly's not going to walk on 2 legs and follow these people out along a road. So freaky, very freaky. All right, story number 2, daytime sighting by teenagers on the edge of Carmacks. And this is from 1995, also summer, June 14th. Location details: it was in a new part of the Carmacks that was being newly developed. Nearest town is Carmacks, Yukon Territory. Nearest road is Highway 2. Observed: I was about 14 years old when me and my friend went to go visit my mom in Carmacks, Yukon Territories. My mom didn't know I smoked, so we snuck across the graveled road into the bushes to share a smoke. We decided to sit in on a trail in the bush that led down to a little lake, with me facing the road and her into the bush. As we were sitting, we both said we had smelled something really funny. It reminded me of a burning dump. Again, this is what we hear a lot in Bigfoot stories, that it sounds like wet dog or it smells like rotting garbage, just that kind of sweet, sickly smell. If you've ever walked past like a dumpster on a hot summer day, just that sweet, icky smell. I started to tease her, saying she needed to take a shower. Then she said, "There's a Sasquatch." I thought she was joking. She got up and started to run as I looked behind and saw a huge, furry man run across the trail. His waist was as tall as me, so I didn't get a chance to look up. All I wanted to do was run. We hear this a lot in roadside crossings where the headlights kind of just illuminate from the waist down. These things are so big, and the person's driving, and clearly you're kind of just looking at the road, especially at night. You're kind of looking a little bit closer in front of you, and they just see the legs run across. They see just 2 bipedal legs, hairy legs. So she's saying his waist was as tall as she was. So she's 14. She's not tiny. She's probably not 6 feet tall, but if she's 5 something, and the waist is 5 feet tall, you're probably looking at a 9, 10, 11 foot tall creature. They continue. The funny thing is, though, that every time I walk by this lake and I can hear, this is only late at night, someone taking steps with mine, paralleling. If I stop really quickly, you can hear something stop right after me. Some friends didn't believe me, so I asked them to walk with me, and sure enough, the same thing happened, and I turned them into believers. Bigfoot sightings are very common in the Yukon. We heard that in the last story, too. I've heard many stories. My auntie says that she was camping and she heard something in the bush, and she threw a rock, and the rock came back to her. I don't know anything else in the woods that could do that besides a person. My grandma says they like to mimic other people, which might explain it following my footsteps. My mother said the same thing happened to her when she ran away from home and was staying in the bush. She said she could always hear something in the bush following her. This leads me to believe that Bigfoot may follow some families generation to generation. I don't know about that. If they're just in the area, maybe just anybody who walks in the woods, they're gonna follow. Other witnesses, yes, my friend Amanda. Other stories, yes, there have been many Bigfoot stories in the Carmacks. This was daytime. So follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Stephen Willis. He says, I spoke to the witness on October 11th, 2005. The incident happened in the summer of 1995 while Debbie, not her real name, and a friend visited her mother's home near Carmacks, Yukon Territory. The house was about 1 mile from the main road outside Carmacks. Debbie and her friend were sitting in the forest talking about 2 p.m. one day in June or July. Her friend saw the Sasquatch, stood up, turned, and ran away. Debbie stood up and looked behind her, catching a 2-second view of a running Sasquatch from the waist down. She said its hair was brown with gray streaks, about 1.5 inches long. It ran across the trail and disappeared into the woods. The two girls went back to the house and didn't return until the next day. They looked for tracks but couldn't find anything on the forest floor. The witness is a member of the original people of the Yukon and has a long family history of sightings. So, probably a native or just a family who's been there a long time. Again, probably familiar with the woods, familiar with the wildlife there. And a bear is not going to run. And if she's saying that this thing, she was waist high on this thing, and she's just seeing the legs, it had to be huge. And it's not a bear. Like I said, a black bear is going to be 5, 6, maybe 7 feet tall, but usually in the 5 or 6 foot tall range. So another interesting story with a lot of details that we hear a lot: the smell, the legs, the gray streaks in the hair. Just very, very cool. And, she mentions her aunt who was camping and threw a rock into the bush and the rock gets thrown back. What could do that? It's a person or it's something else with an opposable thumb that can pick up a rock and throw it and understands the concept of, hey, that person threw a rock at me, I'm going to throw it back. So very cool. These two young girls see Sasquatch in the Yukon. What do you guys think they saw? Okay, and then we come to our last story for the episode. Man recalls his daylight sighting as a young fisherman on the Yukon River. This happened in 1978, again, summer, August, in the Yukon Territory. Location details about 6 kilometers out of Whitehorse. So the first story was in Whitehorse as well, or near Whitehorse. On the east side of the Yukon River, nearest town is Whitehorse. Nearest road is a gravel service road. So, not really near large centers of civilization. This is a little bit lengthy as well, so just bear with me. Observed, the sighting occurred along the Yukon River, just outside of Whitehorse, Yukon, just off a gravel road near a small power substation in a large grassy field skirted by aspen and pine trees. I was only 15 at the time, visiting my father over the summer vacation in Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, Canada. My folks were divorced, and my dad was a helicopter pilot for Trans North Turbo Air in Whitehorse. That summer, I had read the book Sasquatch by Don Hunter with Renee Dahinden. I always say his name wrong, Renee Dahinden. And I'd always had a fascination with the subject. I'm not sure if I had a heightened sensitivity to Bigfoot, but I certainly wasn't expecting what happened that day. And this is something I talk about a lot, Bigfoot on the brain. If you're really into Bigfoot and you go out there wanting to see Bigfoot, you're going to see Bigfoot. And a lot of people do this. They go out there and every, broken tree limb, every stick on the ground that looks like the letter A, or, every weird depression in the ground that looks vaguely like a Bigfoot print, it all becomes Bigfoot. Every twig snapping, oh, that's Bigfoot, It's hard to get that out of your brain when you're that into Bigfoot. Some people can do it, some people can't, but he says he's not expecting that. He's out fishing. So he continues, I was an avid fisherman, catching several grayling each day from what turned out to be my favorite fishing spot. That day, which is forever burned in my mind, I was walking on a gravel road in a northeasterly direction, roughly paralleling the Yukon River. I was on the east side of the river. As usual, I approached the small light blue power or utility shed, roughly 10 feet square by about 8 feet tall. I turned west towards the river to fish at a spot that was riddled with large concrete boulders. My line of sight was completely blocked by the shed as I turned towards the river. The next moment, I will always remember, I was absolutely terrified at what I saw next. A tall, dark, black, rather thin figure standing about 200 feet near a large stand of trees, 45 degrees off to my right. When I say I was terrified, I'm now 42 years old and can honestly say I've never been so completely scared in my life, including almost being killed by a car falling off a hoist and missing me by 2 to 3 inches. Jeez. My body instantly said, get the bleep out of there now. I immediately backtracked a couple of steps and hid behind the shed, in absolute fear that it saw me and I was in harm's way. So to stop for a second, he's seeing this thing, and it sounds like, in the first story we talked about tonight, the guy said he saw something and he thought it was a person. This guy he seems to know exactly what he's seeing as soon as he sees it. He sees it and he's immediately just terrified and like, holy shit, what is that? I have to hide. So just a very different sort of approach to this, whereas some people see these things and like, oh, is that a bear? Is that a person? And oh shit, it's Sasquatch. This guy sounds like he's seeing this and immediately realizes it's Bigfoot. He continues. I was actually about 15 minutes run from civilization, so that shed represented the only thing between me and it. Anyway, and he keeps calling it it. Interesting. Anyway, my instinct was to ever so gently peek around the corner to see if I was spotted. Luckily, it never saw me. That's when things got really interesting. At least that's what I say now in hindsight. At the time, I was a basket case. What I saw was this Bigfoot or someone in a hairy suit. So he's still leaving that as a possibility. It looks like Bigfoot, but he's still kind of saying maybe this was a guy in a hairy suit. What I saw was this Bigfoot or someone in the hairy suit jumping or dancing excitedly around an aspen tree. It was kind of prancing or hopping with its legs about shoulder width apart. Its arms were flailing around. It made no sound. Then it went up to the tree and evidently tried to lift itself up from the ground from a large branch at about shoulder height. As it tried to lift itself up, the branch actually broke with a loud snap. That's when two things happened. One, I knew this was no dream. I actually heard the snap loud and clear, although I can't honestly say I saw it fall completely to the ground. Two, I wasn't about to stand around and watch anymore, so I backed away from my hiding spot and carefully made sure the shed was between myself and whatever the hell it was, and hightailed it out of there as fast as a 15-year-old can run, with my fishing rod and tackle box in hand. I mentioned it to my friends and family in the next few days, but it was mostly discarded as nonsense. And that's sad. You know, people have these experiences, and even if you don't believe them, you know, making fun of them is a little bit rough. A few days later, something I will always regret, I went back with a friend and looked for the broken branch or the donor tree or any footprints. Unfortunately, we were not able to find anything. I thought very long and very hard about the whole thing, and I remember at the time that this was simply unbelievable, and what I had witnessed was extremely special. I've since read just about every book on the subject. I wish I could go back and be more critical of what had occurred. It haunts me to this day. I've told my story to a few people, but mostly don't bother telling anyone, not because I'm embarrassed, but because most people are just ignorant of the subject. I'm now a vice president of an IT professional services firm, married and have 3 children. I firmly stand behind this story. Either someone was playing a prank or I saw Bigfoot doing some sort of ritualistic ceremony that day in Whitehorse, Yukon. So again, he's educated, he's successful, he's married, he has 3 kids, family man. This doesn't sound like someone who's prone to flights of fancy. Plus, I like that he keeps the door open that this was someone pranking him. This was just someone in a suit dancing around in the woods. Maybe they did see him and they're just, you know, pranking him and hoaxing and trying to spook him. I don't know, but I like that he's not going down that route of I 100% saw Bigfoot. He's just saying, I saw this. It scared the hell out of me. It could have been a guy in a suit, but this thing broke a branch and it's trying to climb the tree. Really weird. It was just him, no other stories that he's aware of. Early morning around 8 a.m. This was in a grassy meadow with a large stand of aspen and pine trees where the sighting occurred, about 200 feet from the river. So there's a follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator Christopher Lau. He says, I spoke to the witness at length on the evening of 9/21/08. The sighting took place in late August 1978 on the southern part of the Yukon River, about 6 kilometers from Whitehorse, Yukon. I found the witness to be very credible and well-spoken. He explained to me that although it happened a long time ago, he still remembers what he saw, and he is sure that what he saw that morning was an actual Sasquatch. The witness, who was by himself, was fishing in the early morning, something he did frequently when he visited his father, who worked for Trans North Turbo in Whitehorse, Yukon. That morning, the witness was strolling down the river when he suddenly saw a Sasquatch, which appeared to be about 200 feet in front of him. The witness immediately hid behind a shack and observed a tall, bipedal, ape-like creature perform what the observer refers to as a dance. The creature was noted as being very excited at something, and after this dance, he went on trying to lift himself onto the aspen tree. After snapping the branch and falling on its rear, the witness quickly ran from the scene. The witness was not able to deduce the exact height, weight, and sex of the object, but noted that it was black in color and was of thinner build with long arms and being top-heavy with a hunched back. The sighting lasted approximately 5 to 10 seconds, and the weather was noted as being a slight overcast, and light drizzly rain. The witness also stated he regrets leaving so quickly because he believes he could have watched it for longer, but because he had no idea of what was happening, his initial reaction was to leave immediately, probably the best reaction. The area of the sighting is boreal forest ecoregion, which is populated with black and white spruce, quaking aspen, and balsam poplar trees. These forests are home to many large mammals, including caribou, elk, bison, grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, coyotes, and cougars. It wasn't any of those things. This was either a man in a suit or this was Bigfoot. And when I read this, the dance, he's 15, he's seeing this. To him, it's looking almost like a ceremonial dance. This creature is, uh, dancing and moving around in a weird way. To me, I almost wonder if this creature was excited or frustrated. It sounds like it was trying to get up into the tree. So maybe it had trapped some prey up there that it needed to get, and it was very excited because it knew, like, okay, I got it trapped up in the tree. I just got to get to it. Maybe it was trying to climb the tree before this guy saw it and kept falling, and it was frustrated, and hence the dance. It was like, ah. But he sees this thing snap the branch and fall on its butt and then get back up and trying to climb the tree. And he doesn't see much after that. It's interesting that he describes it as thin built, not the bulky sort of Bigfoot that we're used to from the Pacific Northwest or Alaska or Western Canada. Just a really weird story, but I think an interesting detail. Prancing, flailing, dancing. That's the words he keeps using for it, and that's not something you generally hear in Bigfoot stories. I mean, usually these things are described more gracefully. They glide, they walk quietly, they can stride across, a 3-lane highway in 2 steps, or they just walk up a hill without any effort. So it's clearly not a man in a ghillie suit. They're usually much more graceful and subtle. This is a very different sort of behavior, flailing and prancing and dancing and trying to climb a tree and falling, and maybe a juvenile. I don't know. Maybe that's why it was so thin. Maybe just inexperienced. Again, he doesn't say how big it was, so we don't know. It doesn't sound like he got a very good look at it. He just kind of saw what this thing was doing, trying to climb this tree, falling down, flailing around. I think this is a really interesting encounter. I like that he keeps it open to maybe it was a guy in a suit, but again, hard for me to believe that someone would go so deep in the woods in a suit and just try to scare somebody who may or may not even come by. I mean, the chances of someone coming by is probably much less than actually encountering somebody, and you're just in this suit and you're up in the Yukon territories where everyone carries a gun, because you just don't know. You could turn a corner and there's a bear, there's a wolf, there's a predator that you need to defend yourself from. It's not about anything beyond that. It's just everyone up there has a gun because you need it. In the city here, you don't need a gun. I mean, there's crime and all that stuff, but up there, it's a necessary part of life. You go out in your backyard, you walk out your front door, there could be a bear, and you got to scare it off, or you got to defend yourself. So going out into the woods dressed as Bigfoot is a suicide mission. You're just asking to be shot, and just weird, a very weird story. And I would love to hear what you guys think of this one, because this one I think is a cool one to end on, and just a little something different. All right, everybody. So there's our stories from the Yukon, and I would love to hear your feedback on these stories. I think these are 3 really good stories. These are stories where people saw things where I don't think misidentification factors into it. I think they saw Bigfoot, they saw men in costumes, or they're lying. I don't see much wiggle room here. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a deer. This wasn't just some shadow, 500 yards away that they think they may have seen. I mean, these are up close encounters. These are detailed encounters, daytime encounters, very clearly humanoid, Bigfoot-like creatures. So again, man in a costume. They're completely lying, which I don't think they are, or they saw Bigfoot. So I don't know. Really interested what you guys think about the dancing thing in that last story. Like, what do you think this creature was doing? I've kind of given my opinion on what this guy perceived the Bigfoot was doing. But what do you guys think? Was this thing dancing? Was it frustrated? Was it angry? Was it just a man in a suit just trying to be seen by whoever was walking in the woods? Very curious to hear what you guys think. Loved all these stories. I think these are great stories. Hard for me to debunk them. I always try to approach from a skeptical standpoint and let the story convince me. And these stories have convinced me. These are weird stories. Just there's something to these, I think, and deserves further inspection and investigation. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Was it a dancing Bigfoot? Was it just a weird guy in a costume? Let me know if you have any Bigfoot stories, if you have any ghost stories, UFO stories, seen anything weird. Just want to talk to me. Just want to shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. I respond to all emails as quickly as possible, or just leave comments below. YouTube is the best place to leave comments, but I know Spotify allows comments now. I think Apple allows reviews, not so much comments on individual episodes. But if you're listening on Apple, please give us a review. We could always, benefit from good reviews if you like what you heard. If you didn't like what you heard, just constructive criticism is always fine. Just be respectful. And yeah, until next time, everybody, question everything. Was this a dancing Bigfoot? Was Bigfoot following this guy and his mother? Did these two teenage girls actually see Sasquatch running away from them? Question everything. It's the only way we really get to the truth is to question it. It doesn't mean you're questioning the truthfulness of the witnesses necessarily. It's just we need to get to the truth. We have to ask those questions, and questions always lead to more answers and more knowledge, and that's what we need here. So question everything, everybody. And again, rest in peace to those two guys who were hunting Bigfoot and died of exposure. That's horrible, and my prayers go out to them and their families. As an outdoorsman, as someone who goes camping and hiking a lot, just it hits me a little bit, and into Bigfoot. So I feel really bad for these guys. They were just kind of doing what they loved, and Mother Nature, it'll get you if you're not prepared. And even if you are prepared, it could be rough. There's been times Josh and I have been out there prepared, and it still kicks our ass a little bit because of the terrain and the weather. And sometimes we just come home and we're dragging ass. We're just like, man, that was a rough one. So yeah, just if you're going to go out there, check the weather. Make sure you have enough gear, food, water, warmth, stuff to make fires with, weapons. Just be prepared, everybody. And we will see you next week, everyone. Rock and roll.